Hey, it's Sila Social Studies.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Sila Social Studies. Today we're going to be continuing with the urbanization aspect of the third wave of immigration into the United States, and we're going to be talking about cities and new immigrant life and challenges with urbanization. So we have an urban boom in this country in the late 1800s. So immigrants and native-born Americans moved into cities in large numbers during the late 1800s, causing a rapid urban growth. Only 20 years later, roughly 40% of Americans lived in urban areas or cities. Cities like New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, St. Louis, Boston, and Baltimore all had populations of over 500,000 people. And there were over 35 cities in the United States that had populations greater than 100,000. Now, these statistics are more impressive when you remember that only 30 years earlier, there were only about 6,500 Americans living in California. Now, there are cities boasting populations more than states. So we have these new immigrants coming to America in the early 1900s. Now, most families who moved into the cities from the early 1900s were from rural areas. The first and second industrial revolution helped promote the agricultural revolution, and mechanized and motorized farm equipment were replacing manual labor on the farms. Many people moved to the city to search for work. They would take the unskilled labor positions in the factories. It was during this time that the beginning of the Great Migration started to happen. Now, the Great Migration was a mass movement of freed African Americans moving from the rural South to the urban North to take factory jobs. The peak of the Great Migration happened during World War I and faded around 1970. Many families were trying to escape discrimination while looking for better educational and economic opportunities, and because of the railroads, many cities at major railroad connection points, such as Chicago, became central hubs of opportunity. Now, what type of challenges were faced in these urban areas that people were moving to? Well, cities faced many challenges with the demands of rising populations. They needed more room for housing and businesses, as well as the need to lessen the crowds on the streets. Original buildings in the city were made of brick and wood and could only reach a maximum of about 5 stories tall. The building size was limited because the building materials were either too weak or too heavy, not to mention that there was not a good elevator at the time. However, because of the Bessemer process, the American steel industry rose in the late 1800s. Mills could now produce tons of inexpensive, strong steel. Designers would now use beams in their designs, and they could design multi-story buildings called skyscrapers by using the beams to make sturdy frames. Now that America was growing up towards the sky, Eliza Otis invented the safety elevator, and this helped make skyscrapers practical. What about transit during urbanization? With the overabundance of people crowding the streets, something needed to be done in regards to moving them. Mass transit was public transportation designed to move lots of people. These types of transit included elevated trains, subways, electric trolleys, things like that. Now people could move from place to place in large numbers while not needing to be in the city. And because of this, many middle-class Americans moved to the suburbs outside of the cities. There was also a growth in mass communication through newspapers. Publishers like Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst made popular innovations in their newspapers, like the colored comics. Now Americans can live outside the city and know what's happening inside. The last thing we're going to cover here is we're going to cover the mass culture of what came out of urbanization. And mass culture is where you have a group of people or a grouping of Americans in this confined space help develop this idea of a mass culture. And what that is many people from the same ethnic backgrounds living in the same area meant that they shared many of their leisure and cultural activities. So giant retail shops and department stores appeared in city centers. There was an emergence of world's fairs and public entertainments like amusement parks, and many city dwellers became aware of the need for open public spaces, and parks were designed. Landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted was one of these people who became nationally famous. And Olmsted became nationally famous for his design known today as Central Park in New York City. Olmsted built Central Park for New Yorkers to get away from the concrete jungle. Urban life was very dirty and poor, and Americans needed a place to get away. And Central Park was that place. I'll see you next time.